Welcome to the Leadership School podcast. I'm your host, leadership and self-care coach, Kyla Kofer. Here at the Leadership School, you'll hear leaders from around the world sharing their stories and expertise on how to lead with balance and integrity. Our goal? Teach you how to be an extraordinary leader. Welcome back, leaders. Today we're talking with Dr. Prairie Burgess from Concordia University in a continuation of our college tour, talking with faculty and staff on college campuses around the United States about what's happening on their campus and what's going on in the field of leadership and academia. So I'm really excited about my conversation today. She's going to tell us all about what's happening at Concordia University, the courses that they're teaching, and how they're teaching students about leadership. And we're also going to get into a particular course that Dr. Burgess teaches called Leadership Theory, which I'm pretty excited about. You're going to hear an embarrassing admission on my part, but then you're going to hear Dr. Burgess talk about what exactly is leadership theory, what are the different theories, what does that look like, and she may or may not be giving her opinion on which one's the best. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Prairie Burgess. Thanks so much for joining me, Prairie. Well, before I start, actually, did you want me to call you Dr. Burgess, right?
It's Burgess, but I am very flex.
Okay. Well, you earned it, and I'm really not good at calling people that. Like, I usually, especially when I know them, I'm like, well, your name is Prairie. Like, I'm going to call you that.
This is something I've learned in my leadership journey. I generally could care less what people call me as long as it's respectful. I had a colleague, I never figured out who it was, but somebody on campus really got onto students who would not call me Dr. Burgess. They'd call me Mrs. Burgess. They'd call me the other Burgess because my husband also teaches here. Or they sometimes even, especially older students, would call me Prairie. And multiple students kept coming back going, we were told not to do that. And I think a lot of it was that gender aspect of leadership, particularly since my husband is also here and he's Dr. Burgess. This other person really felt adamant that it was important that I also be Dr. Burgess, that there should not be a distinction just because I'm a female. Nobody ever refers to my husband as Mr. Burgess or, Dr. B or Hey Burgess, that kind of stuff, but you don't get the Mrs. For me, I didn't really care because I think we grow up typically with female teachers and we're used to saying Mrs. So I never took it as a slight. But to this other person, she really felt like what you had said, that earning it. She has earned it just like her husband. You will give her that same respect. And so now I still personally don't care, but I have taken efforts to always introduce myself as Dr. Burgess so that students don't feel like they're put in a weird position of making a choice. But it's been an interesting progression because they felt very passionately that because I was a female in a position of leadership, in a position that is equal to my husband, that we should have the same title because we both have doctorates. So it was a kind of an interesting growth lesson for me.
Yeah, well, and can go both ways, right? So that you have earned it. And so I think that a lot of times, especially as women in leadership, we are used to having to kind of step back and make it not a big deal. And so that other person was feeling like they could advocate for you a little bit, which is really awesome. But at the same time, if you truly, really, it's not that important to you. So it's which one is it? Is it not important to me because I've been so used to not advocating for myself?
I can actually speak to that. My college mentor always talked about after he got his doctorate, his belief was that after you get a doctorate, you should be required to do mandatory counseling for 6 months to get over yourself a little bit. And so I think hearing that as an undergrad just really set into my head that it's just a title. It doesn't mean I'm God. It doesn't mean I'm an expert in that I study this, but I'm an expert literally only in this one area of life. And so I think it just helped me keep a lot more humility associated with the title. But at the same time, I very much understood what this other individual was trying to put out to our students, especially because our campus, we have a lot of first-gen students, a lot of students who are stepping into those spaces that maybe they haven't been before or family members haven't been before, and how to recognize what you have earned and what that means and how to advocate for yourself. And so I think it really became important. It's been interesting, though, because that has now created this weird buffer in fellow colleagues, like staff members on campus. And they kind of hover. Do I call her Dr. Burgess? Do I call her Prairie? I'm like, you're literally my colleague. Please call me Prairie. But then they are afraid to, because then they're afraid that they'll goof up when they're around a student and say Prairie instead of Dr. Burgess. And it just creates this weird power dynamic that can be really good and important. but it can also be limiting and create barriers that you don't always want there. So
it is tough. My experience is nothing like that at all, but it's reminding me of when I got married and I did not change my last name.
Ooh.
Kofer is my maiden name.
Okay.
But I didn't get married till I was 30. And I was like, honestly, yes, I got used to my name, which is funny because like all through my 20s, I never used my last name because I was like, I'm going to get married and change my name, you know.
Oh, that's funny.
But when I finally got around to it, I didn't. But also, like, it's a lot of paperwork, and I was kind of lazy, and I just didn't want to do it, and so I never changed my name. But I had to change it on Facebook. So, and I changed it like in one or two places. And for the longest time, people were like, I just don't know what to call you, until I finally made that decision and said, my name is Kyla Kofer. Like, I put it out there so you know I'm attached, but like, I just don't, that's what I go by. And it's just, it's funny when we're like approached with this decision about who we are, which we didn't really realize we had to make.
Yeah.
Once we've crossed that path. So like you've had to like kind of think through that. And I think that's really interesting. So what's your doctorate in?
Higher education leadership.
Oh.
So I went in with the plan of moving through student affairs and moving into higher executive levels of administration, like a dean or a vice president of student affairs, particularly. And the longer I was in the program, the more I learned that maybe I didn't really want that. And I got great advice from one of my professors. He was just talking to the class and he said, we push leadership all the time, that we always have to move into those next levels to be somebody, but it's much more important to recognize where you're supposed to be and to feel comfort in that. And so I really started wrestling with that and deciding, why do I want this next level? Right? What's the reason for it? And it's not that I can't do the job. I'm confident that I could, but I don't want that pressure. I want to work with students. And when you're in those positions, you're not with the students as much. And so then I started kind of reevaluating, and I'd been teaching part-time for several years at that point. So I kind of started slowly making that progression that direction.
Oh, wow. So you kind of just came to this point of, again, another decision, like having to kind of redirect. I had this goal. You had this goal out there that was kind of on a path, and you even went to the doctorate level. Like, that's not a small decision. Like, that's a lot of work.
It is. And I mean, the doctorate was important for the faculty role anyway.
Right.
And quite honestly,
so it wasn't wasted.
It wasn't wasted at all. And the main reason I pursued a doctorate was just so I could have options in life. I didn't want to be told no. And I just love higher ed. I had stepped out for a year, and my husband was doing his doctorate at the time. And every time I'd go to campus to pick him up, my heart would just yearn. And I knew I needed to be back in higher ed in some capacity. And at that time, I had only heavily experienced student affairs, and I'm very passionate about student development and what student affairs offers in the leadership development of students. But yeah, the longer I was in the program, the more I just felt like, how can I shift that? And then the role that I'm in now is just this beautiful blend, because I get to teach, and that's my primary. I'm listed as a faculty member, but so much of what I do crosses over with different departments on campus. And so I have to have this collaborative nature, working with student affairs, working with student development, and feeding that into the faculty role that I'm in. So it's just kind of perfect.
So let's get right into that for sure then. So you're at Concordia in Austin, Texas. Yes. So what is your faculty role there?
So I am the leadership studies. Well, I'm kind of the person in leadership studies with like a third who gets to join us, but I'm officially the program chair for leadership studies at Concordia University, Texas. And through that, we run a distinctive program where all of our undergraduate students take 3 courses in varied stages of leadership. And then we are recently added in a minor of leadership. So I coordinate all of those. And then, like I mentioned, I work with different departments across campus to add in supplemental programming or just how we're connecting with our students as they're coming through these programs and making sure it's connecting well in themes and vision across the campus.
So all undergraduate students are required to take 3 leadership courses.
Correct.
That's incredible. What are those?
So we have Life and Leadership, which is, in some ways, it's kind of like a standard transition to college course, but we do require it of all of our students, transfers online and traditional freshmen. We mix that course to be a variety of basic skills. You know, they do some time management and stress management, but we really strive on the deeper aspect of self-leadership. Who are you and where are you going? And, you know, time management. What does that really mean to you? How do you look at time? How do you value time instead of just the tips and tricks of the trade, right? Then they move into leadership theory, where we really get to dive into concepts of theory and understand the varied nature that not all leadership is just what you've maybe experienced. It's not just democratic or autocratic. There's a lot of variables levels in there. And then they go, as they're graduating out, late junior, early senior year, they take leadership and career, which gives them the opportunity to take those things they've experienced in their majors, things they've experienced in the previous leadership courses, and turn it back into self aspects toward meaningful work. So some tangible things like building a really solid resume, but then also that deeper aspect of what is your life's calling and how does your job or what you're thinking about next fit into your vocational calling, not just your job.
Wow. So I love that the undergraduates are required to take leadership courses. I just so wish that I would have been required to take leadership courses in school. I mean, I got leadership skills from my courses, but right. To say leadership specific. And I'm glad you mentioned that leadership theory. So we're going to, for our listeners, that's going to be the last half of our conversation because I really want to get into this leadership theory because I want to know all about it. So we're going to talk more about that, but I want to hear more. So then they can take those 3 courses or they can also get into the leadership minor. So in the leadership minor, I assume that they also have those three courses and then it just tacks onto those.
Yeah. So because the 3 are required for their general education experience, they do have to take those, but they're not necessarily factored in as part of the minor. They just they have to have had leadership theory before or they can take it concurrently, but they have to have that or be taking it to step into one of the minor courses. The minor is pretty new. We literally have run our first 2 classes in it this year. So we're really just launching that and we're pretty open. We would love for more students to jump on board with the official minor and take all 4 of the courses. Plus they get to add in 2 electives of their choice of approved electives. But we also are open to students who just want to take that one is really interesting to me. I'd like to tack that in as an upper level elective, right? So we kind of have the both flex options, especially while it's new, but I think we'll probably always keep that because there's value in each one of the courses, even if they don't take it as a group.
You didn't mention it just now. I was waiting for you to say it, but you didn't say it. So I'm going to bring it up because in our last conversation, you said something about the difference between big L and little L. Can you tell me about that and what that means?
Sure.
And what that means in your program?
I'm going to read off our vision statement.
Oh, awesome.
Just because I think that it does start narrowing that down. So we crafted this vision statement for the leadership series in particular, the 3, but then the minor is kind of built off of that. So our vision is to develop a culture of everyday leadership and teach people through both theoretical understanding and practical application how to live a good story through meaningful work and their chosen vocations. And that factors into this big L, little L that we talk about with our students a lot. Most of us, when we come into a leadership situation, we think of titled positional leaders. Oh, you're the boss, you're the manager, you're the CEO, whatever. And those are absolutely leadership positions. But when we really think about leadership is the opportunity to have influence. And if we have influence, then we also have leadership in our everyday lives. We are moms and dads and uncles and coaches and all of the different things that have been leaders, but maybe on the arguably small scale. I actually would say it might be even a bigger scale for us personally, because we listen to those people more than these big name leaders. But I think we associate leadership with all the big names. I start my leadership theory class every semester and I just ask students, give me the names of leaders. And it's a very broad statement, literally just give me the names of leaders. And the first ones they always come out with will fill the board with Martin Luther King and Mother Teresa and Gandhi. And eventually there's usually a student who will bust out my mom. And then they start reshaping their mind of, oh, wow, other people have influenced my life and really walked me through where I need to be and created that leadership structure. So that quickly opens the door for the big L, little L concepts and where that influence and modeling comes from.
I'm so glad you bring this up because I think that's really the point of this entire podcast, to be honest, is that leadership is everywhere. And there are leaders everywhere. And it's really easy to fall into this trap of I'm not a leader if I'm not famous or if I'm not at the top of the company. But there's this guy, I'm forgetting his name right now, who wrote a book about assistants as leaders, like the administrative assistant. That's a leadership job. And you just don't think about that because you have a boss. Well, everybody's got a boss. The president of the United States, the queen has a boss. Well, maybe not the queen or the king, I'm sorry, has a boss. And so their leadership roles in the smallest places and everywhere we go in our lives, and the ability to really truly lead ourselves and just lead the people around us. Leadership is about the one being in charge. It's about the one making decisions, have other people are following you. Where are you influencing? All of those things happening. So I love that you're bringing this up in students, and you're making it like, what I'm hearing is that you're making it like, it's not just about your vocation. We're going to train you we're going to give you the education you need to go get the job, but we're also going to train you and teach you to really just think about your life as a whole person.
Absolutely. Especially that leadership series, the 3 that, our students always, they come into it with I have to take this. It's part of my gen ed. I tell them all the time, you get to take this and you're going to love it and you'll walk out feeling so much value. I think
you're so passionate about this, and I just really love seeing like. I know most of the people are listening, but her face is just so bright, and it's just it's such a joy. And you've got the word joy behind you, which is my middle name, so I love talking about the word joy. But you just, it's really fun to talk to people who have joy about what they do and who truly love it, because that's where your students are going to learn more, because they know that you're in it, right? They know that you really love this, and they're going to feel that passion. And it's so important just in general. And I'm learning this more as I get older, to be in a place of doing things that bring me the joy, that like are that soul giving, life giving thing for you, because you're going to put more into it. And so I'm seeing how you do that with your students, and I just know that that's overflowing, because now here you are. You guys did not even have a minor in leadership before you came along.
It's been fun. I will say I have to give credit to, so I said I'm kind of an office of one. I have a colleague that is fully virtual. He's our only full-time online full instructor, not an adjunct coming in. Him coming on board with me has made this possible, because it would have been a lot to task with just one person really doing it. Because as a program chair, we run a wonderful, amazing team of adjuncts that just make life fantastic. But Dr. Bowling coming on board really made that very possible. And he has, quite honestly, the same enthusiasm I do. When we get on a call together, it's like we have to really watch the time. 3 hours passes really quick. So we have to be cautious in that zone. But he also is split. He's one of our DE&I chairs for the university, as well as teaching in the religion department on campus. And so I only get to tax him a little bit, but his enthusiasm and his motivation really helped make this transition to deepen the program into more than just our leadership series.
That's amazing. So like you have this small team, but you guys are doing so many things, because you're teaching a lot of courses.
I do.
What courses are you personally teaching?
So right now, because the minor is just rolling out, we chose to roll that out online first. And so I passed those to Dr. Bowling, Gerard Bowling, to kick those off online. So I'm really just in the series. I get the life and leadership, the leadership theory. I don't actually teach as much of the leadership and career, because I can't keep my hands out of things. That student development side comes in. I also started some student practicum courses. And so it's just different themes for different ones. We're trying to develop a community board experience where our students will go serve on community boards to see what that side of leadership really talks about. Anything from a booster club all the way up to maybe a nonprofit organization or a major organization that is, what does a board do? Most of us don't know. And most of us don't get tacked into that kind of stuff until we're in our maybe 40s. We're missing those opportunities to hear from the youth in our community, the younger generation, and how they can feed into that, as well as teaching them how to effectively be part of their communities and lead in these different kinds of zones. So we got that little practicum side hustle. I have a group that's working on traditions for our campus and really helping rebuild some of that, particularly after COVID. We're seeing a lot of still residual hesitation about engagement. Students verbally talk about wanting to be heavily engaged, but they're not real sure how to do that. Like, I don't want to leave my dorm. I don't want to drive back to campus. So we've got a student group leading up that and playing with that. We're in the middle of planning our emerging leaders retreat that will take place in 2 weeks. So I do a lot of those little things on the side, feed into the program, but get to do different things.
Yeah. Wow. I'm really glad you guys talk about teaching them what it looks like to be on a board and that they get the opportunity, because I don't know how many board members I've met who just don't show up,
Yeah.
don't know what they're doing, and boards that are just kind of floundering because they don't have the expertise. And I mean, someone has an idea of how they want to change the community. And so they create this nonprofit, but then have no idea how to actually run a nonprofit. And so to give people that skills before they get out of college on like, what does it actually look like to run a nonprofit and to be a decision maker for that, that's really, really important.
When we actually incorporated that into, so one of our minor courses is community and volunteer leadership. And Dr. Bowling luckily does have vast amount of experience in boards and all these different structures. So that we built that into part of that course curriculum to walk through what does a board do? What is their purpose? What are the different types of boards? And then how do you actually lead a board? Because I stepped into leading a board just recently and never led a board before. So there's a learning curve that I'm experiencing. And like you said, we want our students to have those opportunities, but not be thrown to the wolves as they go into them.
Which a lot of us just had to figure that out, right? We just had to figure it out. But having that, yes, they could just figure it out, but having some training and education on how to do that will just make them so much more effective as they get into the community.
We sure hope so.
And continue on with whatever they're doing in their lives. It's amazing. Hey there, leaders. Kyla here. Thank you so much for listening. You know, if you like this show and you want to support us, we have just opened up our Patreon page. So you can go check it out at patreon.com/leadership school. For just $6.50 a month, you're going to get all of the episodes completely ad-free. So as we add paid sponsors going forward, as the show is growing, we are going to do ad-free for all Patreon supporters, but also the best part is that you're going to get the bonus role. So after the interview, we usually keep the conversation going for just a few minutes, and this tends to be the richest part of the conversation. And I often think, you know, I really wish my guests could have heard this part. So I'm going to just keep the camera and the microphone rolling. And then I want to share that part of the conversation. It's still like, it's not the interview, but it's still the rich conversation with these incredible guests. I'm going to share that conversation with you on the Patreon page. So if you're really loving this podcast, we'd really love to continue to support you on your leadership journey. So definitely check us out at patreon.com/leadership school. And thanks again for just being so invested in your leadership journey. Okay, I really want to talk about leadership theory with the time that we have left, because I remember first hearing this term. Here I am, a leadership coach. Well, I do transformational leadership, so I'm about the personal development, right? But I do this whole podcast, leadership, all leadership topics, right? But I didn't hear the word leadership theory until well into when I started this podcast. I had never even heard of it, and I was like, someone said it, and I went, "Oh, am I supposed to know what this is?" So I really want to hear, what is leadership theory, and can you explain this to us? And then and just I know this is a whole entire course that you teach. You can't condense it into the 20 minutes we have left. But what can you give us that will really give us an idea here? Get your teaching hat on, because I really want to know.
All right. So I actually have a way to boil this down, and it's something I've really been developing. And someday when I stop practicing all the stuff and actually sit down and write something, it'll turn into a great little journal. Leadership theory in general, and maybe different people have different scopes, but the way at least we approach it here on campus, it's breaking down the different theories and approaches to leadership. So I think, we already mentioned so many students, I get a lot of attitude when they first come in. I don't want to be a leader. I'm just a follower. Great. Followership has a lot of depth to it. Let's talk about that. I already know leadership. I was the captain of whatever at school. Great. How did you actually lead? Well, I was the leader. Okay. What did you do? And so leadership theory gives us those foundations and structures to really talk about how we're leading. Martin Luther King, fantastic leader, but students generally can't speak at all to what he did that made him a fantastic leader. They can talk about his speeches, they can talk about his marches, but they don't look at the actual leadership. And I think most of us were probably raised that way. So that's what they say over and over again as they walk out of the course. Like, I had no clue there were so many theories. Yeah, there's a lot. We only get 2 credit hours for this course, and there are way more theories to dive into that, which is why I'm excited about the minor. So we try to kind of highlight it, give them the big shifts, or at least we start with the big shifts. I think that was probably one of the most significant areas for me as I started teaching this to students instead of being a student of it myself. really recognizing where those shifts took place and what that meant for leadership and for our communities. Do you want me to go into those real quick? There's about like 7 of them.
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, really, we didn't start as a science looking at leadership or studying leadership until around the 1840s. And I give broad decades because, I don't know, it's easier for students to grasp. But around the 1840s, we really started looking at this. We got this idea of the great man theory came out that people talk about. And there's lots of lovely nuances to that. I'm going to boil it down, and who knows who listens to your podcast, they may disagree with me. But the main takeaway that people seem to take from that theory is that leaders are born. And that's where that idea of, you hear it all the time, oh, they're just a natural born leader. In the leadership studies, in psychology studies, and a lot of various things, we've all kind of debunked that at this point. We know we can learn leadership aspects, but that residual thought is still there. And you hear it. You go to any playground and someone does something and they're like, oh, they're just a natural born leader. They're super outgoing. They're a natural born leader. And it is so much deeper than that. So really, like I said, around the 1840s, that really started kicking off. About 90 years later, 1930s, we saw a new approach. It was like, oh, okay, so we have this idea of born leaders. Well, what is it that they're born with that makes them leaders? And so we got this concept of trait theory, really looking at people's personality traits that may or may not leaned toward good leadership, and breaking those down. All of that fine and good, because I think we can associate, there are certain things that we expect of leaders, but some of it we can learn, like empathy. We want leaders to have empathy, but we can also learn empathy. So yes, there are traits, but they don't necessarily have to be born into us. The flip side of that also is, just because you're an outgoing person doesn't mean you're a good leader, right? Like there's lots of traits that lean well towards leadership and positional leadership, but that doesn't mean you're doing it well. So
I love that conversation of what does good leader actually mean? Like, 'cause how many leaders do we know that we're not actually good at it?
There's an assignment I make students do, and they have to analyze that. And I tell them, look at the leader and then make your decision. And you can say they were a really good leader as far as definition. They got things done and whatever, but I wouldn't want to follow them. They were crappy as far as leadership skills. There's a difference between the two, and to really recognize that opens the door to be better leaders ourselves. So yeah, past the around 1930, we started seeing about every decade new resurgence in leadership theory. And when you think about what was going on in like the US, this is also predominantly Western leadership approaches, right? But as we look at, that surge of people going into higher ed, people researching things more, it makes sense that every decade we started seeing new theories come out. So around 1940, Ohio State researchers, they really started diving into this idea, kind of like what I was talking about. Yeah, you have traits, but what are you doing with your traits? What makes you a good leader? And so behavioral approaches stemmed out of that. And there's all these little minor theories underneath all of these categories that I won't get into. But behavioral approaches really did look at, okay, you do have to have certain things, but how do we use those things to be more effective? Then around the 1950s, I tell the student, when I draw the timeline out on the board, I have this huge squiggle line in between here, because until around 1950, almost all of the leadership research was really focused on the individual leader. What were they doing? Who were they as an individual? And then around the 50s, we got these ideas of contingency approaches. There were other variables that impact our leadership abilities. And so like Hershey and Blanchard's situational theory, and my brain is like path goal theory, and just contingency theory in general. These all start to factor into the different aspects of who are your followers? What works for them? What do they need? What is the actual situation that you are in? And what kind of leadership is going to fit well into that? And so this variable concept really kicked off and changed, in my opinion, the face of leadership. Like everything starts shifting from here. Another couple of decades go by, we hit the 1970s, and we get into transactional leadership, which is really, I think, just a term of what we've been doing a lot before then. The transformational leadership, like you're talking about, we really saw a surge of that in the coined terms and structures and how we do transformational leadership. And then servant leadership really came onto the map with Robert Greenleaf, and the Greenleaf Foundation has really grown from there. But the idea, servant leadership and transformational leadership end up looking very similar when you first glance at them by definition. Both are about empowering others, building others up, but transformational leadership by and large is looking for an end result of significant change. So like Martin Luther King, a fantastic example of a transformational leader, pouring into people, pouring into communities, building people up to create significant change. Servant leadership is that removing yourself. It's not just about acts of service. And we hear this term all the time. I'm a servant leader. I went and picked up trash. No, you were a wonderful servant. You're not necessarily a servant leader. They don't have to go hand in hand. And so getting people to really consciously think through what servant leadership is, moving yourself out of the picture, focusing on your followers, building them up, letting them be the best they can be to be effective in whatever role they're doing, right? Then we moved into, the surge of management. And so around the 1980s, you got a lot more of those management theories coming out. And you look around a lot of business programs now, and you will see heavy discussion about management, which incorporates some of these leadership terms, but they are focused much more on a management mindset of task accomplishment. How do we be most effective versus a leadership mindset of developing relationships, casting vision, and making that happen. And then the final one, as you move towards this last, 10 to 20 years, you're seeing a lot of discussion and research coming out related to followership and what that really means, which I think is beautiful and powerful. And then this idea of leading with love, which to me is kind of a rebranding of servant leadership, but
rebranding.
It's kind of that basic idea of people first. If we put our people first, we're going to see returns that are fantastic, whether it's one-on-one, whether it's a major corporation. If we focus on our people first, it pays off in really positive ways. And it's, I would argue, the right thing to do. So that's your big overview of the major theories of leadership.
Wow. Well, that makes so much sense. And I had heard of almost all of that, but I didn't know that was like leadership theory. Like I just didn't put all of that together. So it makes a lot of sense. And I mean, the whole first season of this podcast, we talked about people first leadership. And so, that is this movement that we're in right now, but all of those different ways of just approaching the way that we lead and what leadership actually looks like and leadership actually means. And so as you're teaching students all of these, I imagine you're taking each one and kind of breaking it down and just really talking through it and working through each of those.
Yes and no, because it is kind of a highlight course. Some of them we get to dive into a little bit more than others. And some of them are also quick. Trait theory is kind of quick. We can hit that easily. It varies on what it is. I will say also the dynamic aspect of a live class, like when you're in person with them, it always varies a little bit. And some latch on to certain ideas more so than other ideas. And so you kind of ebb and flow a little bit. But the baseline curriculum, we definitely go into a little bit more, just more explanation. What do they really mean? For practicality's sake, I try to focus on ones that they will hear more or see more in workplaces. So we talk a lot about things like theory X and theory Y. We talk about the transformational and the servant, because those are terms that they do hear a lot. And I want them to make sure that they are educated on that so that they know what they're talking about instead of randomly throwing it out there. And it is interesting. Actually, just this week, one of my students was talking about coaching. Student athletes always find this class interesting because they come in with usually a fairly limited scope of what leadership is, because coaches have a tendency to kind of coach in similar patterns. And so they were like talking about this one experience where she had a different coach who really sounded like he was leading with love, whether he used that official philosophy or not, that people first, pouring into individuals to create better success. And she was comparing that to a previous leader who was very authoritarian. This is what it is. I said, so do it. And she's like, I loved this one approach. It was so much more empowering and I was able to do more. And so then they took a step back and several of the other athletes said, yeah, I like that too. And I said, okay, but when you can become a leader, what are you going to lead like? So do you think your coaches would have liked this style of leadership? They said, oh yeah, absolutely. Who doesn't? Okay. Well, then why do they default to the authoritarian style? And a lot of that is the purpose of this leadership theory course. If they don't know other styles, if they're not aware of that, you're going to default to what you're used to. And what we're used to may have been great, but on average, it was just what it is. You got to where you needed to be. It was effective, but was it effective in the healthiest way possible?
the phrase breaking the cycle is going through my mind
Yeah,
right now.
very much so.
Because it's like, you know, you're going to do whatever, like you either have been taught or you just are naturally inclined to do, unless you choose and start making intentional decisions about doing something different. And so what you're teaching is that there are all these other options. And what I'm hearing and what I really enjoy is that there's no right way to be a leader. Unless there is. Maybe I should ask it differently. Is there a right way to be a leader?
I've actually been struggling with this lately, trying to wrap my head around that, because typically I tell students, no, there's not, because it does depend on the situation, on the people. This is cliche, but think about Remember the Titans.
Wow. That movie was just a few years ago, right?
Yeah, 20 years, but sure, a few years ago. Students love to talk about it. It's actually still relevant with most students. They've all seen it. They have a tendency to fixate on Coach Boone, the Denzel Washington character. And that's fantastic. But there are so many other wonderful leadership aspects in there as well. And when you start comparing them and saying, oh, Coach Yost used this kind of style, and Gary as team captain used this kind of style, and Julius used this kind of style, you really start understanding this different scope and how we can adapt to our situations. What I struggle with is I feel like people first is always going to win. It's always going to be your best option, but that doesn't mean that you can't still employ some of these other types of theories in with that people first or heavily relational based leadership.
Now, in your opinion, is people first the best option because that is current with our time that we're living in? Do you think that it changes because of culture? Like, would you have said that maybe 60 years ago, people first would have been the best option? Like, I'm just curious, as time changes and things change, or is one right way always the right way, or do things shift and change in the leadership space?
I think that's a great philosophical question. And the reason I say that, I talk about that when we talk about the timeline with our students. I heard this on another, I think like Tim Elmore or somebody was talking about this group of students graduating college is going to be working with more generations than almost any in the past, because people are living longer and working longer, and we're seeing multi-layer generations in the workforce. And so understanding these different approaches, our parents and my parents, right? That's a very different generation than these students' parents. But as we look at that, like my parents and my grandparents didn't grow up in a people first focused leadership structure. It was very authoritarian. You do what the boss says and you don't question it. I don't know how the culture would have responded if they had used a different approach. And there are, we can go in and we can find examples, and those were good, but that wasn't the mainstream approach. That wasn't how people were raised to think. Versus now our culture is very, let's pay attention to me. Let's pay attention, and not in a totally selfish way. Like, let's pay attention to the people in front of us and what do they need? How can we care for them? And how can we advocate for ourselves to have the best environment possible? So I do think that cultural background really does shift a lot of what takes place in leadership. So I think just, my personal values and faith structure, caring for people is always going to be good. But you're right. I don't know if that would have been by and large perceived as the right way 60 years ago.
Well, you also bring up an interesting point too with people, living and working longer. At some point, someone young may be the boss of someone much older than them who operates in a different way. And to show up with that person with the people first model might not work well for that person because they might not understand it or respond well. And which we're like, why wouldn't anybody respond well to that? It's loving somebody really well, right. But they might not feel that loved. And so it's just, I think another little element that we can consider when we're training ourselves and teaching, like, who do we want to be and what kind of decisions are we going to make in leadership, is who are we leading? Like, who are the people that we're working with?
Oh, that's just that beauty of those contingency approaches where you can use baseline material to say, okay, I want to care for my employees or my team or my volunteers or whatever structure it is, but I also can adapt as to what is needed using these different structures. But it does create a lot of frustration for people who like clear direction. I get a handful of students every year that just say, tell me how I'm supposed to lead. I don't like all this. I don't like a standard response in class will be, it depends. What do you think? And they hate that. They want to be told, lead this way, do this thing, and you will get results. And unfortunately, that's not the way our world works. If it worked that way, we'd have perfect, excellent leadership out there all the time.
Right. It is nice to be able to like tell me the formula so that I can follow it.
Yep.
But when there's not a formula other than like you just keep trying new things with like good intentions in mind, like, but having the ideas of different approaches, but also, we've got the theory and the philosophy out there, but then you're tying that in your programs with the practical of, and then having the mentorship from the professors of here's how you can work through this particular situation. That's really valuable.
At the end of the leadership theory course, they write a personal leadership philosophy statement and then kind of explain it in a short essay. And that has been, I don't know how many of them are actually living out their philosophy statements, but
it's really hard, right?
It is hard. But it's great for them to think about it, to sit down. And so they take all this framework that they've been given to say, these are the theories I learned. These are ones I really resonate with. This is how I could see it being successful. And then they have to tie it into their values and do all these little things with it. But then they come up with these little like mantra statements to say, okay, this is how I want to be. My aspirational goals as a leader it's this, right? And whether they're fully 100% practicing that or not, that comes with age and experience and maturity and all the things. But at least they have that framework to then move forward and they know what they want to do and they can work toward it.
And at least it's something to get them started in their journey, in their career, because where I was at when I was 21 and graduating college is way different than where I'm at today, and as we, like you said, mature and grow and things shift and change and we're just constantly learning, right? None of us figured it out. And it's not like, cause they took this leadership theory course that they've got it, right? Like I'm taking leadership theory with Dr. Burgess and I'm like, I got this covered,
Right.
Because that the practical part, the students who are like, tell me the practical, tell me exactly what to do. That can get really, really tough. I mean, just think about, so I'm a parent. I have 2 kids. And I remember before I was a parent, I had a lot of opinions about how people should parent their kids, right? Like a lot of them. And I was like, well, when I'm a parent, I'm not going to be like that, And then that goes all out the window when you're in the middle of it because you're having to actually do it. And so you can say, I want to lead this way. I want to parent exactly like this, but the actual doing of is way harder than just the thinking of it. It's because it's the being in the middle. And so, we can have those tools, but without connecting them to what we're actually doing, that's really challenging. So I'm glad that, to hear that on our campuses that this mix of the theory and the practical are coming together. And
we talk a lot about intentionality, probably to the point where I won't be surprised at all if I see it on student evaluations, like she needs to quit using the word intentionality.
No, don't stop using the word intentionality.
It's so important because we know all the right answers when we sit in a classroom. Oh, this is how I should communicate. This is how I should lead. Are we intentional in that practice when we step out into the real world?
Well, I think that's a great ending to our conversation. This was so wonderful. I've learned a lot, and thanks for explaining all of that. I that was really helpful for me, especially, and it's I always feel like, oh, I shouldn't admit something like that there's something I don't know, like that's just embarrassing, and I should just pretend, because I think that we often think that, right? That we're like, we don't want to. Something that we're supposed to know, we don't want to say that we don't know it, or that.
But there's so much value in that vulnerability and humility to say, I don't know. What can I learn from you?
It matters. It matters. And I don't want to be here on a podcast saying, oh, like, I know everything, or I don't know, or just pretend that I know things I don't, because we're all on a journey to learn something. And that's what I'm here for too. So I just really appreciate it. And thanks for showing up and for being a part of this conversation and joining me on the podcast.
Awesome. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Hey, thank you so much for listening. If you've liked what you heard and you want some more tools and resources to help you on your journey, go check out kylakofer.com/free stuff.